The opioid crisis is a public health emergency that has reached alarming levels nationwide and right here in Chesapeake. To help us understand the origins of this crisis and the science behind it, I spoke with Dr. Ben Fickenscher with Chesapeake Regional Healthcare, who explained what happens to the brain and body when you begin using opioids for pleasure, what opioid use disorder is, and who is susceptible to becoming addicted.
Not only your brain, but the rest of your body, and it's why this cycle of use and withdrawal is so powerful, and why people who are dependent on it will do anything at all costs to avoid that withdrawal. So the very first use of an opioid in excess for pleasure stimulates pleasure receptors in your brain very, very powerfully. And each future use is really an attempt to get back to that initial high, that euphoria. And because things change so rapidly in our brains with opioids, achieving that is impossible. But it's such a great feeling that people continue to pursue it even though they're not able to attain it. And so your pleasure receptors change, you become more tolerant, so you need more of the drug in order to try to get to the same effect. You start to lose pleasure in other things because your pleasure receptors are now conditioned to feel that pleasure from, this one thing. And then in the rest of the body, your body increases or upregulates its pain receptors. So that's why withdrawal is such a terrible thing. When you withdraw from opioids, not only do you suffer GI upset and feel lethargic and shaky and antsy, but you also have horrible pain because you've upregulated your pain receptors, because in part, opioids block pain. Your body is supposed to feel pain. It's what tells us what's safe when we've gone too far. When something is dangerous, we feel pain, and so our bodies need to feel that. And so when they don't, they upregulate those receptors. So quite literally, your pain is more intense when you go in withdrawal than it ever was prior to becoming dependent.
So what is opioid use disorder?
So opioid use disorder is kind of the newer way of saying opioid addiction. It tries to remove the stigma, tries to remove that feeling of blame, that somebody feels ashamed because they are dependent on opioids. For some reason, that word addiction over time has kind of gone hand in hand with somebody who is at fault for the position that they're in. So when we call it opioid use disorder, it recognizes it as a disease, just like diabetes or high blood pressure, and something that takes more than just an individual's willpower to treat. We can't will away diabetes any more than we can will away our dependence on opioids when that occurs.
So who is susceptible to this?
Susceptible to opioid use disorder? Everybody. Everybody is, from young to old, and that's why the cross-section of people with addiction here in Chesapeake and nationwide really knows no socioeconomic barriers. So black, white, rich, poor, young, old, everybody's susceptible. Certainly there are those people who have other addictions, those people who we kind of might refer to as having addictive personalities. There are some risk factors, but those risk factors are found in every segment of the population.
What are the symptoms, or how would you know if somebody has OUD?
So the symptoms of OUD would mask or mirror those of another dependent. So people who spend a lot of time trying to get what they want. People who probably starts as maybe not lying but stretching the truth, or over displaying how much pain they're in order to get medications. But then as it gets worse, it's lying, cheating, stealing. People will become completely different people because they are now a slave to finding this drug that they're dependent to. And it's not because, once they really get mired in it, it's not about getting high anymore. It's about feeling normal, about being able to function. And they are such a slave to that chemical addiction that they do things that in their clear-headed mind Those who are able to recover are aghast at the things that they did. Now people are getting their start with prescription pills. And whether that's from a legitimate prescription from a doctor that they took for too long, or again, like we talked about earlier, we don't know who's got that kind of addictive trigger, and so, or is it somebody who got their start misusing somebody else's prescription drugs? One of the real problems that we're finding right now is that fentanyl is making heroin, or what people think is heroin, much more abundantly available on our streets right now, because it's incredibly inexpensive to make. We are in the emergency department seeing fentanyl in everything. So it's not just in heroin, it's not just being packaged up into things that look like Percocet for purchase. They are now putting it in cocaine. We've seen a lot of people using cocaine who are now having opioid overdoses because there's actually fentanyl cut into that cocaine, because it's way less expensive to make fentanyl than it is to get naturally sourced cocaine. And if they can make you an opioid addict, you will make them a lot more money than you would as a cocaine user. Similarly, we're seeing marijuana laced with fentanyl. Mm-hmm. We're seeing kids come in here who thought that they were smoking THC before school, and then they lose consciousness in class, and I've resuscitated two that were completely independent of one another, different schools, not the same social circle, and they both nearly died in the classroom. So vape pens, that oil that's being mixed in there is getting laced with fentanyl. Fentanyl is not just an opioid use disorder problem. This is a scary thing that's infiltrating everything.
And I'm so glad you brought that up. This isn't just someone who, like you said, it's somebody at school who thinks they're whoever they get it from,
Yep.
but they don't know where that person got it from. So I think that's so important to note, that it's popping up everywhere.
It is. One of the things that was happening for a while was a thing called pill parties. And so people would take prescription bottles from their, let's say, their parents' medicine cabinet. They'd go to a party and everybody would mix their pills together, and you would take one or two, or how many you were gutsy enough to take, see what happens. That's so, as a dad, that's so scary to me. But now if you get somebody who throws Percocet in there that they got on the street and it's actually fentanyl, that one pill could kill. And not only that, these things lead to addictions that nobody on the other side of it has ever said, I really miss my days being an opioid addict. I really miss that opioid use disorder disease I had.
As prescription medications become harder to obtain, individuals may turn to illegal opioids like heroin and fentanyl. I sat down with Chesapeake Police Chief Mark Selesky to find out how these illegal drugs are coming into Chesapeake, how many overdose calls the 911 center is receiving, and the potential danger to officers on the scene.
Yeah, according to the DEA, 3 of the major source countries are China, Mexico, and India. So what we're experiencing is it's coming across the southern border, working its way through the states, and ultimately working its way here to Virginia and Chesapeake specifically. And we also understand from the U.S. Postal Service that a lot of it's being trafficked through the United States Postal Service and some of the commercial carriers.
How many overdose calls are coming into the 911 center?
Over the last 3 months, we've experienced on average about 17 overdose calls per month. And year to date, we've had 130 overdose calls, 102 of which are opioid related, either heroin or fentanyl. And of those 130, 21 have been fatal. So we're averaging about 3 fatalities a month due to opioid overdoses.
Are the numbers rising from, say, previous years?
Well, I mean, we're happy to report here in Chesapeake that they dropped 17% from this time last year. But this time last year we had 156 overdose calls. But as I shared a moment ago, we've only had 130 so far this year. But according to the Virginia Department of Health, fentanyl overdoses are on the rise statewide. In fact, according to the governor's office, they've increased 20-fold since 2013. Since 2013 to the end of 2022, 1,951 Virginians have been killed due to fentanyl overdoses. And another interesting fact, Karen, is since 2020, more Virginians have died from fatal drug overdoses than from motor vehicle and gun-related deaths combined. So it's certainly a problem. Well, our vice and narcotics section works tirelessly to try to interdict the drugs before they get here to Chesapeake. They work hand in hand with our surrounding cities, the DEA, the ATF, and they also conduct very in-depth investigations to make drug arrests here in the city once we get word that it's here.
Like, how difficult is this for first responders to come upon the scene of an overdose?
So there is some danger involved for the first responders when we handle these overdose calls. First and foremost, you don't know what you're dealing with. You see a white powder, could be anything. And the amount that would fit on the tip of a pencil, if you had fentanyl in the amount that could fit on the tip of a pencil, is enough to kill an adult. So the officers have to be very careful when they're dealing with the scene as well as dealing with the victim who overdosed. Oftentimes our role is just to provide whatever life-saving measures we can until the medical responders arrive.
As Chief Selesky explained, the impact of almost daily overdose calls has created a specific protocol for police officers who are usually the first to arrive on the scene. Chesapeake Police Lieutenant Burton with the Narcotics Division discusses the protocol, challenges, and risks to officers who respond to these types of calls.
When a call for service is received that there's an overdose victim, the street supervisor that either responds to the scene or hears the call for service will notify a supervisor in the narcotics section. From there, we will send out a detective or two to help the officers in either processing evidence, interviewing the victim of the overdose, and ultimately trying to determine where the drugs came from and who supplied them.
When an officer arrives on scene, what precautions do they need to take to protect themselves?
Certainly, PPE, the first thing they'll do is put gloves on for protection. We know that the tiniest amount of fentanyl could cause an overdose even to an officer, and it could even be through skin contact. So they'll put gloves on, and then they'll deal with the person that's overdosing the best that they can, and provide whatever medical assistance we can until the fire department gets there to take over. Fentanyl and heroin knows no difference of an age, and there are all different walks of life that are experimenting in this drug or using this drug either recreationally or socially, and a lot of times they don't know what is inside that particular drug, or they get a drug from somebody else that they haven't gotten it from before, and it'll have a different effect on their body, which could lead to an overdose. My message would be, don't take anything that you do not get from a licensed pharmacy practitioner, from your doctor. Don't buy anything off the street. You don't know what it could contain, and you don't know what it could do to your body.
The opioid crisis is a complex and ongoing public health issue. It is far-reaching, affecting families, communities, and society as a whole. In our next episode of this special series, we'll hear from an individual who has triumphed over addiction. Join us as they share their inspiring journey to recovery, shedding light on the challenges, victories, and the power of resilience. If you or someone you know is struggling with addiction, please seek help from qualified professionals and support groups.